So what's interesting is that for college-educated women, the average age at which they have a child is 31. And if you think about your career trajectory, when you're hitting 31, you're starting to hit your stride professionally. And that's that moment where you are at that inflection point and things are starting to take off. So if that's the time that you're having a baby, then there's a good chance that someone around you could inadvertently torpedo you. And maybe they do it with the best of intentions, but they can stop you. They can hold you back from fulfilling your potential because they make assumptions about what you want or what you need as an expecting mother. So I believe that you can start preparing really early. You can start in your 20s, setting yourself up for success by building a really strong network, speaking up about what you want and what you care about. And I did that myself. It's how I've gotten to the point that I am in my career today. I launched a startup in 2013 called weeSpring, which is like Yelp for baby and kids products. In fact, that's what InStyle magazine called us. And I did that by tapping into my network and by speaking up about what I wanted and cared about. And my journey to weeSpring really happened because I had had this terrible experience working on Wall Street with pregnancy discrimination and got shunted out of my job. And that, combined with the experience I had building a community on weeSpring, is what led me to write Here's the Plan, your practical, tactical guide to advancing your career during pregnancy and parenthood. So just like anything in your career and your professional life, I like to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So know going into your pregnancy that there's a chance that you might be really, really exhausted, more tired than you've ever felt in your entire life, like in your bones tired. There's a chance you could have pregnancy complications and need to leave the office early. You could be throwing up in your office basket every 25 minutes in the mornings, and all those things happen to women and they get through them, and it's an obstacle and it's hard, but if you have a clear plan in place first of what you're going to do if one of those things happens, it can really reduce your stress and ease the burden for you. I think the other thing that people are slightly aware of, because they hear terms like pregnancy brain or mommy brain, is just how your mental capacity shifts. It doesn't get lesser, it just is a little bit different. And I tell a story in my book about how when I got back to work after having a baby, I had always been someone who was so detail-oriented and so focused on details. And when I worked in politics, every time a press release went out, it would go across my desk first to make sure that everything was fine, even though I had nothing to do with the communications team. And I got back to work, and you can imagine my despair and horror when my boss started coming into my office telling me that there were typos in the documents that I'd sent her. And I was despondent. I started to think I'd peaked in my 20s and that I was destined to mediocrity for the next 20 years of my life. But what I realized is that it was really just about my focus, that I was spectacularly sleep deprived. No one really warns you for the long-term impacts of that sleep deprivation, but studies have shown that for up to 2 years after the birth of a child, your ability to respond to cues is roughly the same as someone who's been drinking. And it just changes the way you focus and it changes the way you think about things. And what was empowering for me eventually was to realize that by not being head down in those details anymore, because I literally couldn't focus on those details, it freed me up to think much bigger picture. And that was around the time that I developed the idea for my startup. And because I was bigger picture, I was outside of those tiny details, it really gave me a boost to my long-term career. So when I was doing the research for Here's the Plan, I asked almost every woman I interviewed what she knew about maternity leave when she first got pregnant. And almost universally, women told me that they were shocked to find how little they actually had access to. That they had been hearing terms like FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act, and assumed that that afforded them 12 weeks of paid leave. But FMLA affords you job protection for 12 weeks and leave for 12 weeks, but there's no pay involved in it. And FMLA only covers 60% of the workforce. So if you are in a small business or you are in a company that's exempt from FMLA for some reason, you don't even have protected leave. You might have to go back to work, 2 weeks after you are having a baby, even 2 weeks after a C-section sometimes. So for women and men as well, because I think that parental leave is what we need to be focused on and spending time on, setting money aside from a really early age can make a huge difference. That even if you do have some paid leave, it's rare that it covers 100% of your salary for 12 weeks. And I've heard from so many women that 12 weeks is really what they needed. It's what they needed to recover and settle into those rhythms. The reason I care so much about parental leave is because if a woman is the only one who's taking leave to take care of a new baby, it's just setting her up for failure in the workplace and also in her domestic life too. Because while her partner is going off to work and getting better at his job and building up his skills, she's becoming an expert in soothing a baby and managing the logistics of a household and all of the little things that wind up continue to be piled on her plate when she is back at work. And she just keeps doing all those little things on top of her regular day job. So I think it's crucially important that both men and women take leave. I love it when I hear that companies like Etsy and companies like Change.org and Facebook offer equal leave to men and women. I think that's the best hope for pay equality in the long term. Before I had a baby, I'd heard from my friends that having a newborn was hard, but I didn't know exactly what was hard. I mean, sure, you're gonna be tired and sure, you're settling into this new reality. And then my world was rocked. One of my friends told me it was like being in a war zone, and he had lived in Iraq and Afghanistan, so he knew what he was talking about. And he said that you have to be ready to jump out of bed, prepared for a crisis at any moment. And that level of hyper alertness for a sustained period of time during which you're only sleeping 2-hour increments is very jarring to the system. So having a newborn, definitely hard. It's different for every woman, and the recovery period after giving birth manifests differently for every woman and really every baby. That I was a wreck after my first child was born, and when my daughter was born, I was taking her out to dinner when she was 3 days old. So again, it's about preparation and really kind of preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, not being too hard on yourself. I think being a mother to a newborn is just incredibly isolating. And that's another thing that women aren't quite as prepared for. How lonely it feels to spend your day in seclusion with a tiny baby that can't talk back to you and usually is not even smiling at you. So getting out and building relationships with other new mothers, find a new mother support group, join a play group, go to baby yoga. Even if you wind up sitting in the corner the whole time nursing your baby, it's just nice to be around other human beings. And then as you transition back into work, you have to go easy on yourself. That you will get back to your original capacity, but it's not going to happen overnight. And women are extremely hard on themselves. We spend a lot of time, as one of my friends said, shoulding on ourselves, talking about what we should have done or what we should have done better or what we should have done in time for this. So trying to reduce all of those shoulds, celebrate the things you have done. One of the pieces of advice that I give women is to spend 15 minutes at the end of every week writing down the things that they've accomplished. And it's something that's really valuable at in the first days of your career, never mind when you have a new baby, because it allows you to reflect on what got done. We spend so much time worrying about what's still on our to-do list that we never really reflect on how much we really did accomplish. And then that list is there for you if you keep it in a Google Drive document or even in a notebook. You can go back to it 6 months down the line when it's time for your performance review and have a really clear outline of all of the amazing things that you've accomplished. I wrote Here's the Plan because I personally had a terrible experience with pregnancy discrimination, and I didn't know where to find information about it. and I didn't know where to turn. I had this awful experience where I had pregnancy complications and everyone in my company stopped talking to me. And of course, that's the abridged version. The full version is in depth in the introduction to the book, but it was just this really disorienting experience that I'd always excelled, and if I worked hard, I could do anything. And suddenly I was in this position where no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't get anyone to return my phone calls. And I thought I was an anomaly, that I thought that this was something that happened to me or something that I had done to fail, and maybe I was in the 1%, maybe even the 3%. But when I did the research for Here's the Plan, I reached out to thousands of women and I asked them if they ever experienced pregnancy discrimination or family responsibilities discrimination. 15% of them said yes, they had, and another 15% on top of that said they experienced something that might have been discrimination. Whether it was not getting a promotion or having less responsibility when they got back to work, or not making as much money, or getting a terrible performance review when they had had great performance reviews before they had babies. It manifests in so many different ways, and there's so much ambiguity about whether it is pregnancy discrimination. And then there's also on top of that what I call and what experts call benevolent discrimination, which is when someone sets out to do you a favor and they wind up harming your career on the side. And that happens so frequently. And it happens from people who are feminists and egalitarian and well-meaning and supportive. And they don't even realize that they're discriminating against you, but they're washing away your opportunities by making assumptions about what you want and what you need. So I advocate speaking up for yourself, speaking up about what you want. Doesn't even have to be in relation to your pregnancy. You can just say, here's my goal for the next 6 months. I would like to be able to do these 3 things to help me achieve that goal. Can we make it happen? So know that discrimination happens. It happens in the most supportive workplaces. It doesn't happen because people are bad or they're misogynist. It just happens because they're making assumptions. And if you speak up, it's the best way you can stop those assumptions from being made. So there have been articles recently that have pointed out that in some places the cost of childcare and daycare has outpaced the cost of college. So everyone talks about college funds and how you save up for college for your kids over their entire lives. Well, at the very beginning of their lives, you have this burdensome expense, this thousands of dollars a month in many cases. And even when childcare is considered affordable, it's still the second largest expense that any family has after their mortgage. And in some places, it's actually more than rent, which is crazy. So women make this calculation. They think to themselves, well, 70% of my after-tax paycheck is getting eaten up by the cost of childcare. And they start to think, should I go back to work at all? Should I just be home with my kids? Am I just working for, $200 a week at the end of the day? And that is a completely understandable line of thinking, that if you want to be with your child and you want to bond with your child, why would you pay someone most of your paycheck to do that for you? But it's a really different question. It's not a question about whether you want to be home with your child. It's a question of whether you can afford it. And if you want to work, then you have to find a way to afford childcare, because it's an investment in your long-term career. That if you do the math and maybe you're only taking home, like I said, 30% of your paycheck after taxes, well, 5 years from now, when you've worked that entire time and you've gotten raises and promotions and you've grown in your career and your kids are now going to school all day long and you don't have that childcare burden anymore, it really holds you back if you spent that time at home while you wanted to work because childcare was so expensive. So when I was researching my book, I put a question out there to what I called the Brain Trust, which is a group of about 40 women who would weigh in when I had questions like, how do you exactly make your partner a real partner? And I was so surprised by the responses that came back. It was the most engaged, active thread of any of the conversations that we had. And all of the women said that they had these amazing supportive partners and spouses, and they felt like their marriages were so different from their parents, and that their spouse came into it with the idea of really wanting to be an active co-parent, an equal co-parent. Yet despite that, there was all of this simmering resentment under the surface. And even in the households where the dads were really hands-on, a lot of the women felt like they were shouldering too much of the burden. And a big part of that is the thinking work that's invisible, that no one ever sees you doing, because you're not taking out the trash, you're thinking about researching preschools for your child, or you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner next week, and it's unrecognized. So my advice to families and couples is to think in terms of responsibilities rather than tasks, and divide up responsibilities rather than saying, hey honey, can you do the laundry this week? And if it becomes something that you own or that your partner owns, the thinking work gets enveloped into that. And I think you also can really benefit by writing down what the partner's responsibilities are, and by putting it on paper, you finally get a sense of visualizing just how much work goes into running your family. And this is something that's really valuable to do even before you're married, because you can get into these habits and patterns that are about equality and about shared labor. And it's really empowering to see, that this is what I'm doing and this is what you're doing, and you don't have to micromanage it, which is what happens for a lot of women when they go back to work after being on maternity leave. They wind up micromanaging the things that their spouse is doing to help. I have a worksheet on my website. It's here'stheplanbook.com, and that outlines all of the small tasks that go into taking care of a baby, and you can start to divide those up by responsibility as well. A lot of women return to the office after taking parental leave, and they expect they're going to be able to jump right back into the swing of things. And I don't mean to be discouraging, because you absolutely will get there, but I think it's important to go easy on yourself, to recognize that if you've been away from something for 3 months, it takes a little bit of time to ramp back up. And at the same time, you're dealing with severe sleep deprivation still. Even if your baby is now sleeping through the night, which is rare at 3 months, the cumulative effect of only sleeping in 2-hour increments for the first couple months of your baby's life really takes a toll on you. So, your ability to focus, concentrate, sometimes your word recall can be a little bit diminished. And it's easy to feel when you are in that you are never going to get it back, and that you are always going to be like this. And I'm here to promise you that you will get it back, and it comes back, and eventually you start to get back into that routine. But what's most important is to just go easy on yourself for that stretch of time, and celebrate your wins and your successes, and try to avoid being a big critic for yourself. The most powerful thing anyone can do, in my view, to advance their career is to build a really strong network. And that's something that you can start doing as soon as you graduate college, or even before graduating college. And that network is going to stay with you for the rest of your career. And it's going to be there for you if you have a terrible experience like mine, or when you're ready to move on to your next job. And it's going to be there for you when you're bringing in new hires to your own company and you're staffing up your own team. So investing in that network right from the beginning is the most powerful way to advance your own career. And I bring this up with women, particularly mothers, all the time, because a lot of people equate networking with showing up at some industry event and exchanging business cards. And as a mother, you don't really have time for that anymore. You're now constrained by childcare hours, and you're tired, and you want to put your baby to bed, you want to see your baby at night. So I advocate networking by making connections of other people. So if you think about a cell phone network or a social network, it's connections. It's not about just showing up. And you can do that by thinking about who you know who could be helpful to each other. If you're thoughtful in the introductions that you're making, and you really are mindfully connecting people who have mutual benefit, you're getting 2 favors for the price of 1, that you've done things to help 2 people or something to help 2 people who then are going to feel compelled at some later date to do something to help you. So you can develop muscle memory for it almost. If you meet someone and you immediately start thinking about who can help them, eventually over time, the first thing that's going to pop into your head and out of your mouth when you meet someone is, oh, you should meet my friend so-and-so. If you want to support the mothers around you and the expectant mothers around you, the best thing that you can do is not make assumptions about what they want. You can help them, but make sure they know that you're helping them. If you think that something is a favor, check your assumption about whether it really is doing them a favor, and just have an open dialogue and ask them, what can I do to help you? What can I do to support you? I had a business school professor who taught an entire MBA level course around discussing the undiscussables. And he believed that you can't be a great leader unless you are bringing those undiscussables to the surface and encouraging people to talk about these things that otherwise are going unsaid. And for many people, that intersection of work and family is an undiscussable, that managers and employers are fearful of talking about it because they're afraid they're going to say something that's going to get them in trouble. And employees are afraid to talk about it because they don't want to give someone the wrong impression. But what's ironic about that is that the quickest and easiest way for someone to get the wrong impression about you is if you give them no impression at all. So be vocal about what you want and bring it out into the open, that this isn't a management thing, this isn't a woman thing, this is an everyone thing.